Okay. It is 12:01 and I am thrilled to be hosting another Disco Academy session, and today we have a really special guest. Today we have Kaiz Ala Alarakyia, and hopefully I said your name right because I've been saying it in my mind a couple times. Excellent. And I'm thrilled to have Kaiz as my guest because we are going to talk about the amazing work that Kaiz is doing at Google DeepMind when it comes to AI and education. Just a little bit about why I'm so excited. Kaiz is a fellow Canadian. As many of you know, I am Canadian, and he has had such a phenomenal impact in the AI and learning space. He is a senior product manager at Google DeepMind, and he is leading the AI for education research efforts over there. And his team is responsible for fine-tuning the Gemini models for teaching and learning and launched something called LearnLM in 2024 to really focus on improving learning outcomes globally. I don't think we could be talking to a better person about how to think about really how learning can be impactful. And what's so great is he has this phenomenal background, ex-consultant, ex-entrepreneur. We actually went to the same business school. So Kay's, welcome. I'm so delighted to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome.
Excited to be here.
So let's just start a little bit. Let's start from how did you get interested in this? Like, tell us a bit about your journey to where you are today.
Yeah, I think I have a bit of a non-traditional path towards the ed tech space. I actually did my undergrad in chemical engineering, but as at Western University, which is near Toronto, and while I was at Western, one of my professors actually went to become the dean of academic affairs at a new university that was opening in Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. And I really respected this professor, and he asked me if I wanted to come along to help him with university operations. And so I went, worked remotely for a year and then, traveled for 2 summers during my undergrad. And it was just an incredible experience to have the opportunity to think about opening a new university, to see so many students, with the curiosity to learn and limited access to education. And so I started to think about education and this idea of giving high quality access to education to everyone as a mission I wanted to focus my life around.
Amazing. I really love that. And I love that from that lived experience, you realize, like, hang on a second, I want to be like deeply immersed in this. One thing I would say is the work you're doing is so foundational, right? I think what I like to say is like most learning tools are built by technologists, but actually, what's so interesting is that LearnLM is really built by learning scientists. And, you have this pedagogy that you've invested so much in. Let's dive right in. Like, what is the principles that you are sort of really aligning to at Learn and LM and tell us why these ones specifically.
Yeah, and maybe it's helpful to provide just a bit of context too on, where our team came from. We started thinking about this problem of education on the Google DeepMind side around the time that, LLMs came about, though, obviously this has been a problem being worked on for a long time. And what we noticed was that, with this incredible technology, there was really two paths we could go. There was, we could try to take the technology and the solution and then force fit it into this problem of education. Or we could take a step back and figure out, actually what are the problems we're trying to solve? What are the behaviors that we really care about? And where can LLMs and AI be tools to help us achieve those goals? And as you can imagine, we decided to take that second path. And so we created this team of a really like cross-functional group of folks, from technologists to pedagogy experts to professors, and came together to think about this problem and specifically focused around how to build the best AI tutor for every learner.
Mhm.
And so as we started to think about this problem, we we realized that, it's an incredible problem to try to think about and really complex. But first we needed to understand what makes a good tutor. And so we actually went and had like semi-structured interviews and workshops with organizations across the world where we talked to students, teachers, pedagogy experts, institutions, and ask them, this question of what makes a good AI tutor, what makes a good tutor, and what are the risks and benefits of AI. And we came down to, or distilled all of this down to 5 learning science principles that we believed were absolutely necessary for an AI tutor to demonstrate, and that actually weren't present in today's Gen AI models. And so
Right.
those 5 principles are, an AI tutor should inspire active learning, manage cognitive load, deepen metacognition,
Hmm.
stimulate curiosity, and adapt to a learner's goals and needs. And we really realized that these like weren't present in today's models and had to figure out a way to make that change.
I love that. Do you wanna say them one more time? Because I think they're
Yeah,
so good, and I wanna make sure that people don't just gloss over them. One more
that's
time, and
okay.
are
Yeah, and
they
I can
I
put them in the chat too.
great.
And I'll also link our LearnLM landing page where they're present as well. But one more time, inspiring active learning, managing cognitive load, deepening metacognition, stimulating curiosity, and adapting to a learner's goals and needs.
Amazing. And maybe let's, like, dig in. Which one of those do you feel has has had the biggest impact, right? Like, there's all 5, but what do you think that, like, as you said, like, most models weren't built for this, like,
Yeah.
which one do you think has sort of impacted the work the most at LearnLM?
Yeah, I think the most immediately relevant one was this inspiring of active learning, the first one. And the reason I say that is because that is the principle that is most different than how LLMs act today, right? When you think about LLMs and how they're designed to be helpful and immediately
Mhm.
helpful, right? If a student, we know no student would ever do this, but if a student put their homework into one of these tools, right, the helpful thing is to give away the answer.
For sure.
But, we in the education community know that that is not the right answer in most cases. We shouldn't actually give away the answer. And so we were trying to figure out what to do instead. And so we had to find ways to train the model or to change that behavior so that instead of giving away the answer, we relied on different pedagogical moves instead that engaged the learner to take control of their own learning.
Yeah, that resonates really deeply. I have 2 teenage sons, and, even in building Disco, I think one of the things that we get so excited about is, your intentionality behind tools deeply matters. And so, yes, it actually can replace learning if you're not careful, but
Yeah.
it could also inspire active learning if you actually design it in that way. And so, I think what's really interesting about all of these is, you know, these are helping society unlock the human potential and actually transform human behavior versus just driving to, the efficiency or the replacement narrative of what AI is doing. And I think that's why everybody on this call is so engaged in thinking about how can AI really help us transform and learn as humans. I'd love to sort of click into this and talk a bit more deeply around, something I found really interesting when we spoke last, which was you told me that originally you wanted to build this perfect AI tutor, right? That can kind of do the perfect view on learning. And you kind of actually have moved from that to thinking about pedagogical instruction following. Let's try understand that or unpack that for everybody. I thought what you said about Arizona State who wanted, Socratic tutoring that never gives answers or, for my teenager, I certainly don't want him getting the answers too quickly to maybe a different model for YouTube. Can you tell me a bit about how you think about this now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, to what you were saying before, naively, I think we originally thought, we have these principles. If we have a model that can embody these principles, we're good to go. And yeah, as we started to think about how we actually give access to our work, we started to realize that, we hadn't actually solved for everybody. We were just solving for one specific idea of what a tutor should look like.
Yeah.
And depending on the context of an individual product or an individual teacher, even, there's different behavior that is required, or how those pedagogical principles actually emerge really changes.
Mm.
And so, we started to think about at the foundational model level, this idea of pedagogical instruction following, where instead of embedding the principles and the principles alone, we decided to embed the principles in a steerable manner, meaning
Mm.
if you added a system instruction on top, you were able to change the behavior depending on your specific context as a developer or as a teacher. And so, to make that example more clear, right? You can imagine two different system instructions on top of the Gemini model. One could be focused around being a tutor and a writing coach with Socratic
Yep.
dialogue. The other could be being more of an academic editor and suggesting, how things could change for the same piece of work or the same student. And in both of those cases, we should embody the pedagogical principles. We should reflect some level of metacognition. We should adapt to a learner's goals and needs, but we can do that in different ways depending on the instructions. And actually, in hindsight, this has become really important because everybody is trying to figure out the different type of behavior they want in their classrooms
Sure.
and beyond. I just actually, just recently, the UK government has said, we are not allowing any tools in the classroom that give away the answer right away.
Right.
They've also said, we don't want any AI tools to ask about a student's feelings or, their emotional state, which is super interesting because, if you talk to other folks, they say that the emotional state is actually incredibly
Deeply
important.
matters. Sure.
And so this is where this idea of instruction following comes in that, we can embody the pedagogical principles, but make it steerable to the context that is
Mhm.
desired.
I really like that, and I would say at Disco, as we think about the future of learner experience, we've come to a similar conclusion, which is it's not just going to be one type of agent. You're going to have specialized agents for different experiences and at different times in a learning program. So I think that's like really, really helpful to understand the way that you have designed this. Um, we let's actually click on what's really working today because, I think it's really interesting. There's lots of innovation, lots of experimentation, but you're doing a lot of very interesting, randomized controlled trials globally to actually measure learning outcomes. And I'd love to hear like what's actually moving the needle versus, what feels like super innovative but actually hasn't improved results yet.
Yeah. And I think actually the context behind the question is when you implement tools that are powered by AI, you need a way to evaluate their success. And this actually is an incredibly difficult problem because you have evaluation methods for, human tutors or human interventions. And then you have evaluation methods for AI, but there was no framework that brought those two together. And so when we started thinking about setting the bar for ourselves of what does success look like, we actually, before we even started to build our model, wanted to set that bar. And so we decided we were going to set our evaluation framework as a mix of efficacy studies that focus truly on learning outcomes,
Mhm.
um, and then auto evaluations on the other side of the spectrum, which really help us to calibrate the model, right? Because randomized control trials take a term or a year to really do. But auto evals can help us understand if the behavior is in the right direction. And then a proxy of human evals where educators would help us. So along the way, we defined what good looks like before actually trying to build so that we would have a way of actually measuring what is moving the needle versus not. And so that being said, we now have this opportunity to actually try and implement, different models, different products, but with that same bar of what's actually driving learning outcomes. And so, happy to say more about the randomized control trials that we're doing across the world or with the UK based startup Edie. But at least my perspective is that the interventions that work the best are the ones that are integrated into the classroom in partnership with teachers and educators, as opposed to just being tools that are students can use on their own or that are open loop, meaning they don't have a way of actually understanding if a learning outcome has been achieved or not. I think those tools in some cases are quite flashy, but don't actually drive the outcome we're looking for.
And if you double click on adult education, is there anything that you're seeing in these trials? Because I think a lot of people who use Disco are doing a lot of professional development, a lot of adult education, a lot of workforce development. Anything you
Yeah.
would point out about sort of what's, what's actually driving results or just kind of is nice? What does somebody say? Everybody wants the sparkle right now. They're
That's
not
right.
really interested in the steak, but what's actually sizzle,
Yeah.
not sparkle, but or both.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, to be fair, most of our RCTs are in the K-12
Sure.
or grad space, but I think a lot of the learnings are for adult side as well. And I think for me, the biggest learning is actually something we knew before, which is the 5% problem still exists, which is
Mhm.
that in a lot of the efficacy studies that are run, great improvements in learning outcomes, but only for the segment of the population that uses it enough. This is actually where my comment comes in around integration into the classroom, because it's not enough just to hand adult learners tools and say, hey, here you go use them. They actually need to be integrated in a thoughtful way that focuses around engagement and making sure that you can achieve the impact that these efficacy studies say you can.
Yeah. No, I think the intentionality and context makes all the difference. So something, where I had the pleasure of chatting with Kaiz a couple of weeks ago, and that's how we got to hosting this. But something you said really stuck with me that I never really thought about, which was you said, Google DeepMind has solved protein folding, won math Olympiads, yet you actually said that education is harder. And I was kind of taken back a little bit by that. Like, why is education in your mind like so much more difficult?
Yeah, I think it comes down, so maybe I can explain. So the way that we have solved problems in the past is by giving AI a goal to achieve and then allowing it to learn on its own how to achieve that goal, right? So if you think of, we built this AI that does protein folding, that won the Nobel Prize called AlphaFold. We
Yeah,
also built our first actually real success was building this AI called AlphaGo, which played the
sure.
Go board game,
Remember. Yeah.
and at the time quite famous because it beat a world champion. And the way that AlphaGo is trained is you have this AI system. It plays a game of Go, making, maybe somewhat random moves. And then it checks, did I win or did I lose? And it assigns a reward to say, I played well, it was good moves, or it was bad moves based on whether it won. Right. So there's this level of
Feedback loop. Yeah.
feedback loop or what we call reinforcement learning.
Sure.
And when you think about applying that same technique to education, it's incredibly more difficult. And it's difficult for a few reasons. The first is that in a board game like Go, you have a limited set of moves, right? You can either go this way or this way. But in pedagogy and learning, there's almost an unlimited set of pedagogical moves at any specific time that can be taken. The second reason is because when you play, in order for these models to learn, they have to play the game millions of times, sometimes tens of millions or hundreds of millions of times. The only way to do that in learning is to have simulated learners, right? Where you have like a self play with a simulated learner. And it's incredibly difficult to build simulated learners that actually reflect a change in knowledge state that isn't quote unquote artificial, right? Because we found that AI, it's very difficult to tell AI, pretend you don't know something and then intervene and all of a sudden the switch flips. And that is the kind of the third issue, that the aha moments look different for every learner, right? It's not I won, I lost. There are a variety of different learning outcomes. Sometimes if knowledge state stays the same, but motivation increases,
Mhm.
we in the education community would consider that a win, right? And so we can't just limit ourselves to one type of learning outcome. And even if we did, the moment of intervention of whether we quote unquote won or lost is not apparent until much later when,
Right.
students take assessments and exams. So it's an incredibly, incredibly difficult problem. And we continue, of course, our approach is one of humility, where we understand that this is a very difficult problem and we're committed to this grand challenge of doing it the right way.
I love the intellectual humility, and I love sort of the recognition that learning is it's both a means to an end, right? And it's also an end in of itself, but it's actually hard to understand or to see it always like directly. And I think that's super important in, even, your comment on kids can take the test, but not everybody performs well on a test, but they have that knowledge. So even the, outcome of, testing has inherent complexity to it. And I think that really speaks to we're human. Human beings and human interaction and growth is complex. And, that gets me to our sweet spot at Disco. So at Disco, we're really obsessed with human connection and really cohort-based learning and social learning is a big reason why a lot of people use our platform. We believe that humans learn better together. We're learning what it's like to work with human first like AI, and we're investing in that. But I wanted to sort of get your take on social learning and the way humans learn with AI. What's happening in the space and sort of what's challenging about it?
There's a lot happening, and I think, from the bottoms up, which is great, like, individual people are trying, having agents that they work with or, folk or AI participate in group conversations.
Mhm.
Some, work work better than others. I think this is a incredibly important, but an incredibly difficult
Yeah.
challenge. And it's, difficult for a few reasons. I think the first is that just technically for multiple learn to manage multiple learning profiles to facilitate the conversation in a way that actually helps everybody achieve their learning goals is difficult. I think that there's a lot of opportunity here, and I would say again, AI should be a tool but never a replacement for humans learning and learning together. There is something inherently magical about humans coming together, and the goal of at least the work that we're doing is never to replace that, but rather to enhance it.
Mhm. That's really powerful. And our belief is that it's not just the learning, it's the encouragement, it's the support, it's the belonging, it's the feedback, it's the opportunities that present themselves because you did something hard together. So really interested in sort of continuing to innovate around how AI plays the right role as a tool. I'd love to hear, are you thinking about take me forward, 10 years, right? What do you imagine when it comes to collaborative learning? Like what could be possible with an AI assisted experience?
Yeah, and this is, like, very my I have, like, some thoughts, very much my take, but it's really hard to know, right? Because the technology is progressing at such an incredible pace, and so I think it's almost impossible for me to think of it 10 years away. Maybe I can think of, like, even just, like, 2 or 3, right, as, like, the art of the possible.
Sure.
Um but, I can imagine scenarios where you would have a AI supercharging a human conversation, where maybe you would have, individual agents for every learner, and then you would have a facilitator agent, and that agent is able to focus the conversation, where it matters. It's immersive in the conversation, so it's not a chatbot at all. It's probably audio with some ability to do, image generation or activity generation that participants or learners can participate in together, and is able to actually intervene at the right moments to progress the conversation forward, but more importantly, know when to take a step back and not
Mm.
feel the need to actually have a back and forth of, like, I talk, you talk, I talk, you talk, but rather in a discussion forum and, with a series of objectives. So it's there's a lot of opportunity, I think, within the space of cohort-based learning, but it's right on the edge of, what anybody's thinking about.
Absolutely. And can you take me forward 10 years when it comes to just AI, like generative AI learning? Like, where's your sort of art of the possible that you're really hoping for, that you're seeing at LearnLM?
Yeah. Again, I think 10 years is hard. But, like, here at DeepMind, we talk about AGI a lot, artificial general intelligence, right? Where there's, like, almost like one model that is better than a human in any capacity, the any leading expert in the field. And when I think about how that might apply to education, I think that there's an incredible opportunity to truly transform what happens in learning, where if there is, for example, a teacher, that teacher no longer has to be both a subject matter expert and a facilitator or conductor of learning, but can specialize more in actually the conductor of learning and have the AI be the subject matter expert. I think that I think that's a big opportunity in itself to unlock the potential of and help teachers unlock their potential and the potential of their students. I believe that most of learning will move more into an experiential into a kind of an experiential mindset where you're learning around people. That could be virtually or it could be in person, but you're learning around people. You do work on the side, do it on your own where needed with
Mhm.
AI, and then come together to discuss, develop your critical thinking, and push the boundaries of what's possible.
That's super, super interesting. And, I'm super grateful to hear how you're thinking about the art of the possible because you really are at the leading edge. One thing that we may have glossed over a little bit that I think I want to kind of come back to before we jump to some more practical takeaways for this group is just human and AI outperforms either alone. And, you've done like this ED study and it proved that human tutors supervising AI tutors actually outperform both the humans and the AI alone. And we're kind of talking about that in these future predictions. But on this call, we have a lot of training organizations and training leaders. And, when I think about this audience, people are building instructor led training. Any thoughts on, how we should be thinking about this? Like, what does the supervision that works actually look like? And what advice do you have for people who are running this type of instructor led or cohort based training?
Yeah, and maybe let me just give like a 1 minute context on this study for
Sure.
folks that haven't seen it. So ED is a UK based math startup, and it partners with schools across the country and beyond to implement their intervention program specifically around math, and they are very focused on research around misconceptions, identifying what misconception that student has, remediating that mistake, and then seeing how that transfers to future problems. And so what we did, we've admired Edie's work for a long time. And so we integrated our Gemini, LearnLM tutor to power part of their platform, and we ran a randomized control trial. And so if you can imagine, three arms of the experiment, we had arm one where students who made a mistake received a static hint. This is what Edie's, original platform was like. And actually
Sure.
by itself, that intervention of a static hint led to 2 to 4 months more of learning a year. So it was
Huh.
by itself amazing. Option two, or branch two of the randomized control trial, was a human tutor intervening, when a student made a mistake. And then the third option was, or the third branch was an AI tutor, the Gemini AI tutor, where a human would supervise and look over basically the AI tutor would draft messages for the
Yep.
for the human tutor. It would not send anything, but the
Yep.
tutor could then edit and change, right? And so then what we realized was that the human tutor and the AI tutor both outperformed the static hint and kind of, were even on both misconception resolution and misconception identification and remediation. But actually, when you thought about when we measured how students did on the next problem of the same concept, the AI tutor supervised by the human did better than the human tutor alone. And, the reasons for that, we were surprised by these results as well. We expected parity. And the reasons is because the AI tutor was pushing the student more on this idea of metacognition, of
Right.
understanding what they know and didn't know, where the human tutor, in some cases would stop because it
Yeah.
was like the student figured out the problem. And so I think it unlocks this ability, and I should say, like, the human tutor also intervened with the AI tutor in, I think 20 or 25% of cases. Almost none were factual interventions, but
Yeah.
a lot of them were around building the personal relationship around kind of that human connection. And so, and that is likely part of the outperformance as well. And so I think this combination is really incredible, where you would have a human who is responsible for the motivation, for the accountability to for that student, and for informing or encouraging that productive struggle. And then you have the AI tutor that is as factual, or in most cases, more cases, more accurate than the human, and is able to push the conversation forward in ways that the human tutor may not have. And so then, to get back to your original question around supervision, I think setting up where there's the opportunity for humans or for supervisors to know and be aware and have control over how that AI is performing and what it's working on, which is part of why we built this in a
Mm,
instruction following way. And then understanding where they need to intervene further, specifically with the human superpowers of, this motivation and accountability and personal relationships that we believe are incredibly important, through reporting, or that can be incredible. And then I think the third aspect is actually using AI to help supervisors or instructors become better and do
gotcha.
pedagogical coaching. And we have actually partnered, we have a larger partnership with Khan Academy, but we also partnered with their sister organization, schoolhouse.org. And some of
Mhm.
the work we're doing there is exactly that, to coach human tutors on how they can even do
Yeah.
better than they're doing today.
Oh, such useful information for this audience. And what's so interesting is in Disco, we have two modalities. One where we actually draft a response using AI and a human can supervise that response, edit it, change it, and it's sent from a human. And I think a big part of that is the perception of a human receiving instruction or coaching or guidance from a human versus from AI. So that's one, like that's a lived experience. And we also have something called Ask AI, which is very much being able to ask of an agent for information. And I think what we're experimenting with is all these different modalities. And I think using that AI to actually help the instructors improve their pedagogy and vice versa, having that nuanced understanding and relationship with students is a really, really thoughtful way of approaching that. So thank you for sharing that. Now, we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to get really practical. Two questions, and then I'm going to open it up to our audience here. But what's the number one thing you see that organizations actually get wrong when implementing AI in their learning programs?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were talking about before about not being intentional, about hearing AI or thinking that they have to implement AI, but not thinking about how AI should be used as a tool to address the needs of the users or the learners
Mhm.
themselves, right? I think, to your point, actually, in some cases, we need, the student needs that motivation or need that accountability, and so it totally makes sense to have a human supervising a tutor, right? On the other hand, this ask agent is really interesting because sometimes students feel embarrassed
Sure.
to have conversations, or maybe the human is not available all the time to supervise, and therefore, when a student is working late at night or learning, around their work hours, do they have the opportunity to ask questions? And so I think, like, for example, to use Disco as an example, I think it's a great example of you being intentional. And I think a lot of organizations are not intentional, right? They say, should we just implement an AI tutor and leave it there for people to use as they want? And that doesn't always work. Or should we try to make the AI only respond in very specific ways that we're comfortable with, and not explore the possibility of evolving the curriculum to have AI as a tool, right? To say, hey, well, if we used to have, written submissions as our form of assessment in this program, maybe we should think about having live dialogue with an AI agent, right? Thinking about how you evolve the work that you do with AI to achieve the same learning objectives, versus just seeing it as something that, you should do because everybody else is doing it.
Right. Yeah, that intentionality and really understanding like learning is a complex process and it's quite nuanced. So, really thinking deeply about, how to experiment with all the different elements. Like assessment is a great example, content generation, personalization. So that's really helpful. Just not bolting it on and sort of set it and forget it. That makes a ton of sense. I think the disco question for us is our thesis is really that transformational learning happens through active, experiential methods. And it kind of goes to what you're talking about. Now we have this generative, active, possible new method. It's projects, it's peers, it's lived experience, feedback. It's not passive content consumption. And we think human connection is going to be more valuable in an AI first world. Do you support that or do you challenge that? Feel free to be as provocative as you like, but love to hear your thoughts.
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I think there is a ton of research, and this comes, not necessarily just through the work I've done in AI, but before that too. There's a ton of research around experiential learning more generally, right? That it's a lot more effective for students to participate in simulations, have discussion, with reflection and metacognition promoted at the end, at beginning and end, versus a passive content. And so beyond like taking my AI hat off, I think that absolutely is true. I think what AI gives is the opportunity to implement that in a much easier way and one that empowers humans to actually connect, rather than having to focus on the admin or focus on or not know where to spend their time. And so, yeah, I definitely agree with that.
That's awesome. I want to open it up to questions. So, one question I have in the chat is a little bit more of a tactical question. And then I have another one that's more thought provoking. So, one is there a specific name for this LLM Gemini model, or is it embedded in Gemini Pro? Is it available via API? Like, let's talk to how people can actually experience some of the amazing work you're doing.
Yeah, so it is embedded into Gemini, into all the models starting with Gemini 2.5. And so, yes, it is in Gemini Pro 3, it's in Gemini Flash 3. And the way that you access the goodness of this LearnLM work that we're doing is through a pedagogical system instruction on top of the Gemini model. And
Mhm.
so you can either do that by writing your own gem in gemini.google.com, which is like our own consumer app, or through the API if, access the model and add a system instruction.
Fantastic. That's super helpful, and we're happy to, share more in the chat as well. The next question is really, how about scenario-based adaptive learning? How are you thinking about that? And, are there agentic AI-based solutions for scenario-based adaptive learning?
Yeah. Yeah, like I said before, I think like scenario-based, experiential-based learning is really important. Actually, the startup that I founded focused mostly on scenario-based learning, so I'm a big fan. I would say that on the model level, we're working to enable those experiences to be built, but I think we rely on developers and, folks as such as the ones on this call to actually build those
Mhm.
experiences themselves with the context of whatever the learning objective is, or the subject or topic. And so I would, from the experimentation that I've done, I think the model is really good at generating scenarios, especially when given learning objectives. But there is so much opportunity to build the infrastructure, the user interface around the model capability itself that exists. And yeah, I would be really excited to learn if folks have experimented with that.
For sure. No, that's great feedback. So the next question is from Wendy, and Wendy actually works at Disco. So I'm delighted to see Wendy asking this question. Wendy is our data science and AI lead here. So her question is: in educational context, practice-based learning is a gold standard approach that has really been supported, traditionally been supported by lab activities, role play, and scenario-based problem solving. Does DeepMind see world models like Genie 2 being capable of enabling this new kind of interactive learning environments that can take us even further and possibly even more deeply connected than chat based interactions for learning? Thinking here of the proliferation of tutoring applications via chat that we see in learning applications and learner usage today.
Yeah, Wendy, totally. I totally agree. I think this is an incredible opportunity. For those that don't know, the Genie models basically model an immersive world around
Mhm.
you where you can actually interact and like walk through. And I think it's an incredible opportunity. I think that combined with new technology on, for example, like hardware on glasses, where you can actually experience a virtual reality or an augmented reality environment, combined with obviously the work we're doing on LearnLM and Gemini and some of this work on Genie. unlocks incredible possibilities. And so definitely agree this is possible. I will say, I think chat was just the first
Yeah,
modality, right? And I think
right.
we at Google always believed with like the investments we've made in Genie, in Nano Banana, right? On
Mhm.
our, or VO, image and video based, that like chat was never going to be the only way to interact. It was just the first start. And I think
The easiest.
AI came about so quickly that everyone was like, okay, chatbot is the way to go. But there's so much more potential than that. And really excited again to see what people are building with the models we're developing.
Incredible. Okay, last question is from Danny Austin. And the question is, do you have any recommendations for the 5% problem for adult learners taking advantage of resources and training modules more effectively?
Yeah, I think the 5% problem is, and I haven't, I know it was done in more of a, K-12 or post-secondary context, but I think the same principles apply that if adult learners are not engaged, and I think the research would probably show that adult learners are likely less engaged than K-12, but part of that actually comes because of of the environment that they're in, right? Where like it's being done on the side of their desks or in a lot of cases or not in a full-time capacity. And so my recommendation is generally to figure out ways to embed AI into the existing learner workflows. And
Mhm.
this is where humans again can help, right? Where if you are in a group-based environment, you have accountability to the people around you. Even if you're working on something with an AI agent on the side, you are in a group environment. And so that in itself is important. I think from the instructor side, being able to see how people are using the tools and then intervening to say, hey, notice you haven't followed up or haven't submitted this, because AI is able to notify and show what's being done and not done in a much more scalable way. And not just actually done and not done, but actually the process, right? How long did somebody spend on this? How many
Right.
turns back and forth? That information can be incredibly useful and was just a blind spot to teachers and instructors before. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, to use AI to identify where interventions take place, but ultimately it comes down to humans to enforce that.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest learnings we've had is that feedback really matters. So if AI is able to actually capture, right, usage or the questions people are asking, then you can use that to actually improve the programs. And I think that's the whole idea of like learning is a living, breathing experience. So to wrap it up, I do see one more really quick question. So I'm going to throw it in quickly and then we'll wrap it up. But I just want to get to Tim. I think you touched on this, but maybe let's elaborate because voice is, something we've just integrated into Disco and I think is like kind of the next frontier in many ways after text. But do you see potential for voice-based assessment with AI feedback integrated? You can answer really
Yeah.
quickly on that
Yeah,
one.
yes. I think voice is an incredible frontier. I think one definite application is assessment with feedback. I think there's more applications also in terms of guiding
Mm.
students, but often it depends on the content, but often voice is best when paired with some sort of visual
Yeah,
interaction, right? Where again, we look at this
agree.
mostly in a high school post-secondary context, but most learners do not do things only focused on the computer, right?
Yeah,
Or on their phone and having a conversation. They're in the real world, they're with other people, they're writing things down. And so the ability to be able to look at something and to show something is really important. And I'll say that like you can find it on YouTube, but we released an Astra homework tutor that we built combining the best of LearnLM with this immersive voice and video experience. So would highly recommend folks check that out too.
amazing. And on that note, just want to say a huge thanks to Kaiz. It has been a phenomenal conversation. You're doing absolutely incredible work. It is so great to see all of the innovation and just all of the like deep care to actually get the pedagogical instruction and sort of really deep work around what makes learning work embedded into DeepMind's products and LearnLM's products. So thank you so much. Thank you for talking to us. And I want to wish everyone a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. Great.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining.